Hi, welcome back to the shop. Thanks for stopping by. The second most frequently asked question I get is about gouges. What I use for gouges, what grinds are on them, how do you use them. The most asked question I get is how much something sells for, and if it's not a commission, I always disclose that. But so I thought I'd do a video. I've been asked to do a video several times on the gouges that I use, how I sharpen them, and what I use them for. So these are the 5 gouges I use, and I'll show you all of them. Other than the small one, because it's going to be the same as these ones. This is a Carter & Sons 1¼ inch spindle roughing gouge. This is a Carter & Sons 1/2 inch spindle gouge. This is a record 3/8 bowl gouge, and this is a record 5/8 bowl gouge. This is a Hamlet 5/8 bowl gouge. The differences in these bowl gouges, this one, I'm not sure if you can see it or not, I ground this with a long grind. I'd always used it with a traditional grind. Then I put a longer grind on it. Didn't care for it with the longer grind, so I've ground it back. It kind of looks goofy now, but it does have a traditional grind on it. This one is just at the end of its life because it's getting too short to sharpen now, but it has a traditional grind as well. And I'll show you how I sharpen all these and the angles on them when we grind them. This one is the Hamlet 5/8. It has a longer grind on it. So I do the long grind on the Pro Edge. The traditional grinds I do on a CBN wheel with a Wolverine jig, the same as I do with the spindle gouge, or the spindle roughing gouge. The spindle gouge I do on the Pro Edge as well. So what each one does, the spindle roughing gouge is for taking square stock in spindle orientation, which means your wood is on the lathe and the grain is running between centers. It is not meant to use on bowls. You don't do end grain turning with the spindle roughing gouge. The reason for that, now these have a very strong shank on them, but the reason for that is that typical spindle gouges, roughing gouges, and spindle gouges don't have a very solid shank on them. You see these bowl gouges are solid shank, 5/8 all the way into the handle, so it's got a lot of rigidity. These do not have that. So that's why you don't use them. They're not safe. They're not made for that kind of torque. And you get much more torque on your tool when you're turning end grain, like on a bowl, than you do turning spindle orient wood. So again, taking square wood down to round, removing wood quickly doesn't give you the best finish, although you can, if you sharpen it well and take your time, you can get a good finish off this tool. Spindle gouge is for folks who aren't good with a skew like me, for making detail cuts, coves, beads, profiling little details in spindle orientation. And then of course the bowl gouges are for typically cutting bowls. I use them for a lot more than that, and if you watch my videos you'll see me use these, especially this one. This is my favorite chisel of all time, and I use this one as well for the same purpose, but you'll see me doing a lot of detail cuts or shaping cuts on the outside of wood. What I find is I use these chisels in the place of this chisel to do the same job, except for very fine detail work. But when I'm just making a shape on a mouse or a little wooden toy of some kind, like a rabbit or a seal or whatever, I'll use these chisels because they will cut more wood, or cut wood more quickly, I guess is the best way to say it. And you get the same finish off of both tools if you're careful. I do most of my roughing in with my bowl gouges, and again I'll show you how we do that. A lot of people will say about, when they're turning a piece of wood, how it just kind of kicked the crap out of them because it was a lot of work and it thrashed them. And if you're getting thrashed around, you're not using your tool right. And so having said that, safety obviously is paramount. Use the right tool, for the job, which basically is don't rough in or don't cut end grain with these. But other than that, it's whatever tool works for you. So if you can get the job done and get a good finish, the goal of any cut on a lathe is to get the best finish you can off your tool and to keep you from having to sand, because nobody likes to sand. So we'll start out with the spindle roughing gouge. I'll show you how I sharpen it, and then I'll show you how it works. This is a low-speed grinder which is made to sharpen with. I think it runs at 1750 RPM. It's an 8-inch grinder. I've got a 6-inch over there as well. I use the 6-inch with the little platform, which you can see here. This is what I sharpen my scrapers with. But this is the one that I use here, the CBN wheel. And it's a 240 grit, 8-inch CBN wheel. I use those for my gouges. So when you want to sharpen a gouge, in this system, basically this little cradle back here, the end of your handle sits in it. You adjust the wheel or the angle by loosening this off, sliding this in and out until you match, until your bevel on your chisel lays perfectly on the wheel. But this is sitting perfectly aligned on this wheel. So you do get what they call a hollow grind. So you get a little bit of a curve in your grind, which you don't get with the Pro Edge, but I don't mind that actually. So all I'm doing when I sharpen this, it's very simple. And if you are new in turning and you want to get a good finish, a good grind on your chisels, I recommend this. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to turn the grinder on. As it's going, I'm just going to rotate the tool both directions until it's sharp. You'll see a lot of spindle gouges are ground. These edges are straight. Now I like them taken back a little bit, just in case you ever do make a mistake and get that corner in, that corner can catch. I mean, it's not necessary to do this. I've always done it and I continue to do it. It doesn't affect the performance of the tool. Now, if you are wanting to do some fancy stuff with your roughing gouge, I know I have friends who can actually do very similar work. If you watch Terry at TJ Turnings, Terry can actually make a spindle roughing gouge that's ground straight, do the same task as a skew. I don't do that, probably because I can't or haven't tried, but anyhow. So all we need to do, I'm going to grind this one for you, and this is going to be the same grind as I use on the small, the 3/8 bowl gouge and the 5/8 bowl gouge with a traditional grind. The only difference is the angle. So you set it on. That gives you a really nice grind. And if you're a beginner and you want to get repeatable grinds on your tools, I highly recommend a jig like the Wolverine. I've used this for 20 some years and it's been really good. Down to 55 degrees. And again, I know there'll be all kinds of comments. This isn't right. This isn't right. This works for me, and this is what I've done for 25 years. And I'm probably not going to change some of this stuff. Again, the priority is safety. After that, it's what works for you, and this is what's worked for me for a long time. Now, when you make this cut, you're going to want to keep the handle of your chisel down. This is not meant to be used straight. If you use it straight, you get the same quality of cut as you get with the scraper, which you don't want. You want to get a good finish as you can. So keep your handle down, and the goal is to have the bevel, all the bevel, rubbing on your wood. So when you're doing spindle work between centers, that's a pretty safe orientation. You can turn your RPM up. So this is running right now, because of the belts it's on, it's probably running at about 1800 RPM. So, handle down. So you can see very quickly it gets you from square to round. Not a bad finish, not the same finish as you get with with your finishing tools. It's not a finishing cut. Although again, if you take your time and have a nice sharp chisel, you can go slower and make a more clean cut. So that's what we use spindle roughing gouge for. Alright, so next we're going to look at the 5/8 bowl gouge with a traditional grind. Ground exactly the same way as the other one, other than we have to adjust the length of that shaft where the handle sits back in on the Wolverine system to match this angle to the CBN wheel. On to the first 5/8 with the traditional grind. So there's the chisel, there's the grind, done exactly the same way as the bowl gouge, as I said before. This one's a little harder to measure because it doesn't fit in there very well. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to measure this, but This is about 40 degrees. So you have to take my word for it because the flute's too low for me to measure, but this is 40 degrees or very close to it. What I would use this for, or what a typical person would use this for, if you're in the bottom of a bowl, and I'll do a diagram later to show you the difference in where you'd use a longer grind with a shorter grind. At the bottom of your bowl, on the arc at the bottom, you can only cut a certain steepness with a chisel with a long grind because your bevel's only touching on the tip and on the heel. And that's typical no matter what you do. That radius gets much tighter if you use a shorter, steeper grind. So in this case, the 40 degrees is a steeper grind. You'd think 45 would be steeper, which the other one is ground at, but it's not. So I'll show you how I use this in bowls later, or I'll show you a drawing of why shorter. But if you watch many of my videos, you'll know that I do a lot of little projects, and this one is really good on the outside of a piece for shaping. I just find it cuts very quickly. Now I'm going to show you the particulars of how you use these on a bowl later on. Just going to chew these ends up a little bit. Can't get in there with that one. But if I'm doing profiling again, you keep your handle down, you ride your bevel. On round wood, you ride your bevel. So let's say we're going to make a little vase out of this. You can shape it how you choose. I'm just going to demonstrate the cut. See that the bevel's rubbing on that? Now you'll see I'm going against the grain here a little bit on this one, just the way that the grain is angled up. But you can see here that the quality of cut is far superior to what I was getting with the bowl gouge. So this wants to be cut this way. You can see that's one thing you got to watch when you turn. You can tell by the orientation of the grain. I'm cutting into this end grain right here that makes it rough. But it does cut quickly, much more quickly than a spindle gouge. So we'll get into some bowl stuff with this in a bit, but again, you can tell that it cuts much more cleanly than the spindle roughing gouge. All right, next we'll get into the spindle gouge. All right, so with this tool, I use the attachment on the Sorby Pro Edge. I set it to 45 degrees on the stop. Now there's an adapter for this, which has 3 holes in it, and there's also one with a single. I use the one with the single for my chisels, most of them, and you can see that that is the first hole. So when you grind this one, there's both sides. That puts a super edge on. You can see that or not, but they just gleam. While we're right here, Same process with the 5/8 bowl gouge. Set to 45. I always take those tips off at the very back of my flutes, the very tops of my flutes. So I've got a nice square cut and down into here. It's not square across there. So what I need to do with this chisel is put a little bit rougher, that's the diamond blade on there now, so I need to put a little bit more coarse belt on there and just bring these shoulders down flat. And that makes it a lot easier to do a pull cut, which I very seldom do. Now there's an adapter that you can buy that works with the Wolverine system. Looks like this. It basically does the same thing as the Pro Edge. So you just put your chisel in, tighten it up, and you can make that same grind on your CBN wheel. Now I have found that that is very, I'm just setting that there, that's not set by any means. I found that to be very cumbersome to set up, to get repeated. You see I've got lines marked on here and I've done different things in the past. To try and get it repeatable, I just find it's much more difficult to set up. But if you have the time and patience, I'm sure there's lots and lots of people that do that. Spindle gouges are good again for doing detail work. You do want to rub your bevel, so you are holding your handle down of your chisel so that your bevel rubs the work. Now everyone does this a little bit differently. I like to roll. I like to roll mine, and if I'm making a cut, I do, push. But I'm just going to show you, for example, on this end. So you certainly can make aggressive, clean cuts with the spindle gouge, no question about it. That's a really clean cut right there. That requires very little sanding. There's no tear out. So you can do that with a spindle gouge. I just prefer to do a lot of that stuff with the bowl gouge. So if you want to cut coves, again, chisel down so your bevel rubs. Work your way from one side to the other side. Assume this was a tenon and we wanted to part it off. You can make that cut, and obviously if we were farther in from the tailstock center, we could make that cut all the way in until we took it completely off. Now you wouldn't do it at that high RPM. I'm just going to pop this off to show you what kind of cut you can get on that. And again, this is in soft pine, but if you look at that cut, it's super clean. Now, some folks use these use spindle gouges for hollowing in grain on goblets and things like that, and you certainly can do that. I do it sometimes as well, but I like to use my carbides to hollow with. So that's another cut that you can do. You just have to make sure that you bring it from inside to outside, and don't try and push your way down the walls, pushing into the end grain. You want to cut in from the bottom. So basically you cut in from the bottom and pull them back out. Now another thing that you can do with the spindle gouge, and you can do with the bowl gouge as well, I like to use, in spindle orientation, I pretty much always use my spindle gouge. So you can see that there's a little bit of tear out here, I think you can see. Now another thing you can do with a spindle gouge and spindle orientation is you can make a shear cut with that. Now this kind of goes against what I told you earlier on. You can do it either direction. Sometimes you're limited though. I can only shear cut this a certain distance. And I'm going to be into my headstock, but we'll start. So basically you ride your bevel, hold your chisel handle way down low. Way low. Like this. I've got a notch in my tool rest that's inhibiting me from getting down there where I want to smoothly. So let's see if we can do a little better here. All right. There we go. So you can see that shear cut left a really clean surface on that. And again, this is, if you start sanding this with 220 grit paper, you just have to touch it and it's perfect. We'll cut a bead. So we're just gonna make some room here for a bead. Again, you could roll them as steep or as shallow as you wish. Usually again, bevel rubbing, handle down. Just roll the tool this way, roll the tool this way. Then you can clean up to it, come in the opposite direction. Alright, so that's by no means anything fancy, just to show you how how you roll your tool to get that cut. Nice and clean. Looks like it's really bumpy on top and it's just light coming from both directions. Again, I'll show you just really quickly. So piece of 180 grit paper. That was real time, took 5 seconds. Alright, so let's put a bowl on. Alright, so this is just a little 8-inch maple blank. It's not very big. It's a bit at a round, so I'll show you the process. Again, cutting it into truing it up, and how I do it. And I get asked a lot of questions about why I do things certain ways. The first cut that I make is I true up this face. Then I would typically go in and I'll true up the inside because these are twice turn bowls. So you can see this is hollow in here. It's got a pedestal in it. So we'll cut that pedestal out and show you that as well. But what I like to do is I'm going to finish my outside first. So I want to true up the inside so that it doesn't vibrate. So the more in balance the inside is, I find the better finish I can get on the outside. We'll use the long grind camlet for this. And you could use the other one. I turned complete bowls with the other one many times. One of the most important things when you're using a bowl gouge is that you align the bevel with the direction you want to cut. So you don't go in this way trying to cut straight because you're going to hit the heel and it's going to bounce you out. You don't go in this way, it's going to give you a catch. So you just try to align the bevel, and as soon as you get that ledge established, then you let the bevel of your chisel ride in against the flat surface you just cut. So we're going to turn this down some because it's going to be out of balance. And that's the other important thing, don't run your lathe so shaking all over the place, that's not safe. So I'm probably running here at about 800 RPM, which is fine for this. So again, handle slightly down. Handles down a little bit. Now I like to start my cuts, at the very least start them, and you'll notice if you watch many of my videos, I do a lot of gouge work with my flute closed. I'm going to show you, I'm going to explain what that means. So open and close bevel. You'll hear that talked about if you watch people turn much. This is a closed bevel. So I'm holding the flute parallel to the lathe bed. That's a closed bevel. You don't want to ever go past parallel. That's closed. Open is this way. You don't ever want to go past perpendicular to the lathe bed. So that's the two terms, closed and open. I always start my cuts with a closed bevel, and lots of times I make my cuts with a closed bevel. It is the least likely you will get a catch. If you're up like this, then the tool is going to want to pull you over. If it's like this, it's going to want to take it the other direction. So especially for beginners, much more easy to control with a closed bevel. And again, you will point your bevel in the direction you want to cut, and that's the direction you make your cut. Okay, so again, handle down slightly, start in easy. So you're not having to force it, just let the wood come to the tool. Now, I want to bring this into balance. You can see how out of balance this is. So that means that my whole piece is out of balance. I can't turn it as high RPM without the lathe shaking. And so I want to true this up. That will allow me to get a better finish on the outside when I'm done. All right, so once again, handles down. You want to start with your bevel pointing the direction that you want to cut. I like my flute closed. That gives me the most amount of control. If you get a little bit this way, there's a chance your chisel will skate back on you. So you should never have to have a death grip on your chisel no matter what you're doing. Put your finger behind it. Make sure that it can't go this way. Align your bevel. Okay, it's very smooth and easy. Now, one thing about turning bowls or turning anything, a lot of people only use their arms, and you need to have your feet placed. So you notice that as I made that cut, my handle came way over here. So I had to rotate my handle all the way around to here. So if I'm standing with my feet planted here, close to the lathe bed, which was nice and easy to look in here, by the time I get to the end of this cut, I'm hitting my body, and I can't finish that cut. So you got to have yourself set so that, have your body set so that you can move your body with the cut. I know friends of mine, we kind of joke about it. It's a dance almost. All right. So now I'm going to show you a way to cut these out. You can cut it across this way. Some woods, that last little bit gets quite difficult. So what I like to do to take the centers out is turn my chisel the other direction. Cut it out this way. And that's a quick way to take that center out, and it's much easier to do. You get a better cut. It cuts it out quicker, and sometimes going across this grain lengthways, these aren't as good at that as even a scraper would be, for example. So now we've got the inside trued up. It always is easier on regular wood, and you can throw that out the window with burls, because burls, the grain is everywhere, and cutting uphill or downhill sometimes is irrelevant on a burl. But on main regular grain wood, you should always cut from uphill to downhill, which means you can see these grain lines go this way. That's the direction that wood wants to be cut the most cleanly. At least I think you can see those grain lines going that way. But we're not going to do that right now, because I'm going to show you what I think is the exception to rubbing your bevel. And again, this is the kind of cuts where you see people getting just vibrated and banged around. You don't need to be that way. Close flute, handle down, pick your direction, align your bevel with your direction. Nice and easy, no banging. You're going to get a little bit. So until you get a ledge that is round and flat. Alright, we're not quite flat yet, and then I can tell that when I'm turning it. So you see, this is a nice clean cut even though we're going the wrong way. Sharp, sharp, sharp chisels are the answer. Now, I hope you can see this. I can rub my bevel here because I have a nice round solid piece of wood. But if I push my bevel into this piece hard, and you don't want to push it in anything hard, but you want to hold it in, when I get to here, my chisel is going to come in, and then it's going to get pushed back out. It's going to come in and get pushed back out. And the more around it is, the more of this you're going to get. So I've done it for years this way, and I watched the video, it's been probably 3 or 4 months ago, and I think it was one of the baddies, I think it might have been Stuart Batty. He called it floating the bevel, where you're almost on with your bevel, but you're not quite, just off a little bit. And that takes away a lot of that. You're always going to get a little bit of it, but that takes away all that thrashing. So I'm going to show you the difference of riding the bevel as opposed to floating the bevel. And again, this is mostly round, but not quite. So now we're going to ride the bevel. So you can hear that? Now we're going to float the bevel. And you can hear the difference in those cuts, and you can see the difference in the tool. And believe me, you'll get way less chatter lines on the outside if you float it. So there. Now I'm going to show you on paper why the difference in these. Now I'm going to show you the reason why you may want to have more than one grind. Let's just assume I started to draw it, but you can't really see it here. I can probably darken it in a little bit maybe. Let's assume that this is going to be our bowl. Okay, and we're going to go across here. This is the shape we want it for whatever reason, because we like it, or that's what our wood is going to make the nicest looking piece out of, however that goes. Alright, and obviously this is small, but it's good to exaggerate it, just to, it gives it a better example. So you'll see that when I cut this corner, that I'm going to touch. I'm going to touch here, and I'm going to touch here. But in between here and here is a space where my bevel is going to be this way. So your bevel's not actually going to ride. It's going to ride on the heel, it's going to ride on the toe, and it's going to do that regardless all the time, no matter what grind you have. The shorter this distance is, though, the better you can make that corner, the more contact you're going to get, and the smoother corner that you'll get. You got to be pretty spot on to cut a really sharp corner with a grind like that one, because what you'll get is you'll get lines in it here, and you'll see lots of times you're going to get lines regardless. Most people do, normal humans. And so what you do then, or what I do then, is I just come back with a scraper, a very thick non-vibrating scraper, and I just pull those back out this way. But if you use this grind, you'll see it's much shorter. And so in effect, if we do that same one on this side, you'll see that you're going to touch. much more closely together. You're going to touch here, and you're going to touch here. And although this isn't drawn very well, your gap is going to be smaller. So you can get that corner cut much more cleanly with that shallower grind. If you're doing platters and bowls where there's a nice smooth radius and it's not that sharp, the longer grind certainly works great. And a lot of beginners cut straight in bowls. They make their bowls like this, and it's probably the hardest bowl there is to turn. They come down in, and then they do this. That's terrible. They come down in, and then they do this. And that is the hardest cut that there is to make on a bowl in terms of finishing, because you can't get anything in there. You can't get a scraper in there to clean out those or whatever. So if you're a beginner, start out making your bowls with a nice smooth radius like this, and you will be, that's terrible drawing, you'll be much happier with your result, and you're going to spend a lot less time sanding until you get better at it. Alright, so hopefully that was helpful. Again, didn't do anything fancy. That wasn't the intention. So the beads aren't perfectly symmetrical, the cove isn't perfectly symmetrical. That wasn't the intent. It was just to show you the grinds, show you the gouges that I used by request, and give you an idea of how I do it. Once again, safety first. There is not a wrong way if it's safe and you get the result that you want. If you need to spend a little extra time sanding because you're not comfortable making a cut a certain way, then so be it. As long as you get something at the end that you're happy with, that's what matters. So thanks for sticking around. If you're still with me, I really appreciate it. Thanks again to everyone who subscribes to the channel and watches the videos. I appreciate that a ton as well. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. If there's anything else you'd like to see, leave that in the comments as well. And we'll see you next time.